This is what's up. So basically what we're going to get into real quick is what is actually happening in terms of the coming World War III, the fake Antichrist, the fake alien invasion, all of this crap that really has nothing to do with us moving. Because in actuality, if we as men, and when I say men, I'm talking about men and women, we were in a position where we could just live without any of these external evils trying to derail our natural progression, we would have already been celestial gods again. You know what I mean? The holdup is all of these fake entities and all of these fake people walking around here acting like they are doing something for us when they really are working for the enemy. So we want to really get into who and what that enemy is so that way we can have a fuller understanding. To do that, I wanted to build on where a lot of this issues, the modern day issues, are coming from. And a lot of them are not coming from, I've touched on it before, but I should say, however, a lot of it is also just a redux of stuff, because everybody will talk about one game or one person or one thing. When in actuality, it's a plethora of different organizations and groups working in tandem, working against each other. However, their modus operandi is usually the same thing. And what that is all of these suckheads are out here trying to re-establish connections with non-corporeal entities that exist as intelligences that cannot necessarily be harnessed in a proper or real way. But it's not going to stop these niggas from thinking that they can control things or try to give energy to things or take deals from things that they really don't know what they're dealing with. They really don't. So what I'm saying is when the person is there trying to incant Oshun, right? Or trying to incant this person. What they do is they put they have familiars or what they call fetishes that they put around the altar, around the room, around wherever this thing is supposed to be manifesting at. And they have enough of the familiar things in it, right? That allows them in their mind to believe that they can harness this thing and this thing will come into the area because it is coming into a familiar place with energies and inferences that give it power because of its affinity for those things in life, allegedly. The problem is, how do you go to air and tell the air that you want it to manifest as this or that? You see what I'm saying? So yes, you can incarnate something, you can manifest something, you can conjure something to be what you think it is, but in actuality, you never know what it really is. You don't. You don't. You could say that you manifested Beelzebub. You could say you manifested Lucifer. You could say you manifested Legba. You could say you manifest any of these things. And these things could actually physically be there with you. That doesn't mean that those things that you're seeing are exactly what they are. That's all I'm saying. You dig? Because there's no way that you can tell that if it's telling you the truth or not. You can't bind it. You're not Solomon. You don't have the signet ring. You haven't attuned your pineal organ up enough to be able to discern whether or not this 4-stage class entity is lying to you or not. Like, be real. Like, really be serious. Like, this is what they got niggas believing that they can do. And this is why these things can continuously feed on us, because these niggas feel like they have the energy to be able to discern and break down what these things are, right? And turn them against the rest of us to do their bidding for them. That's what they believe. And you can't tell them that it's not true. You can't tell them that no matter how much blood they let, no matter how much, you know what I'm saying? They believe that they're going to do that. So you got to ask yourself, who is they, right? Well, before we get into who is they, let's look at who they believe the obvious enemies and the obvious people with this is, right? Well, we're going to go into the modus operandi too. I'm going to show you that real quick. So let's look at what their end game is first, and then we'll get into who they are. All right. The end game, the global technocratic governance, aka scientific dictatorship, in which every citizen will be under constant surveillance by artificial intelligence, a slave to the ruling elite, right? They infiltrate all government institutions, collapse from within, ensure that nothing works as it should, create division and distractions to cause arguments, convince the public that democracy has failed, thus preparing them to accept the new system. The trap. Introduce concepts, sustainable development, climate change, net zero, use it to convince the naive public that the planet will die unless we allow experts to make all the important decisions. The Stargate, this is the important part. Stargate is the name of the machine required to monitor millions of people simultaneously. 20 powerful data centers currently under construction, each running AI programs to operate all digital systems, including smart cities, digital IDs, central bank digital currencies, carbon allowances, 15-minute cities, social credit scores to monitor your personal behavior all the time, everywhere you go. This is what they was trying to do by 2030. They got to now push the shit back to 2028. Remember, this was all supposed to happen by 2012. They had to push that shit all the way back to 2016. To 2025. We in 2025 now, so they had to put this shit back even further now. So what this keep telling me, what this showing me, is that they shit ain't working. Not how they want it to work, because they got to keep pushing it back because they keep missing they iron sights and they deadlines. Out of 535 members of Congress, only 10 of them reject APAC money. 525 members, which is 98.2% of Congress, are paid. They paid off. They are owned. They got sex tapes. They got all types of shit on these niggas. They got them messing with children. They got them eating feces on camera. They got all of it, okay? Congress are paid to put Israel's interest before yours. Yes. So this is the modus, right? And these are the culprits, right? But we still haven't gotten to who this is specifically, okay? Now, back in the days, the Supreme Court had a case, and that case was in 1930. Now, forgive me, I'm still trying to find the actual case number and log, so you can go check it out yourself. But in the meantime, I'm going to just go around what it was about. Basically, this was in 1930. This was right when they seen that the banking holiday was going to happen. All these niggas was basically going to be involved with each other, and they was going to basically try to destroy the planet with all of this bullshit. So that's what they did. So what they did was they had to start to lay the groundwork for this a long, long, long time ago. And they didn't do it by themselves, meaning that there wasn't just Caucasian people at the head of this, because them niggas was slaves up into the 1800s. So, late 1900s. So let's not even put them into it as if they are the masterminds. No, the true masterminds to create some bullshit like this on your screen is people who look like us, okay? Because we was the only people around long enough to help institute all of this bullshit, or help institute this bullshit. You understand? All of this is basically a list, a graph, a Rexo, if you will, on all of the illegal projects, human trafficking, organ harvesting, where all of this stuff is coming from. See, Hyperborea, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. This is the basis of it, okay? The shit that sank Atlantis was the same shit that's sinking us now. And that is working with these Tamahoos and trying to raise these other entities up to do the work for us, because niggas got too lazy to figure out how to technologically and how to spiritually advance themselves without technology, without gross technology. Because spirituality is a technology. It's just a fifth to ninth dimensional form of it, right? Third dimensional, fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional technology is all the shit we're dealing with now. AI, rogue nanobots, you know what I mean? this type of bullshit. Cyborgs, biborgs, cybernetic interfaces. You see what I'm saying? That's the low level transhuman shit we dealing with now. Well, all this can be traced back to this area right here: Hyperborea, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. Right, and then from there we get Sumerian. We get the so-called Sumerians and all of that. Okay. How this is happening, what we have to understand is this goes very deep, as you can see. This is we would have to go into this in stages. So we'll start with this with stage one, which is again Hyperborea, Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. So all of this was the old ancient world empire, right? And them people was split down the middle. There was 60% satisfied, 40% satisfied, 40% dissatisfied. Those 40% dissatisfied, as we read about in the Yaqub story, these are the motherfuckers we got to worry about. Because those were the ones who initially decided that they were going to branch out and create their own situation, because they were more anchored to the ways of the people who was here, like the Nephilim and the Watchers and the Gregorian and all that type, all of these demons, all of these niggas that didn't have nothing to do with us and our development, naturally. So these entities existed. These people who look like us wanted to then use those entities to try to find ways to control or contort the rest of us. We wasn't with it. So after the so-called flood and all of that, the deluge came, and these things could no longer exist because all the titanic ropes had been destroyed and then had been converted into land masses. So the very land masses and shit that we walking on is actually these things. And these were the Nephilim, right? Who we're calling Nephilim, right? But Nephilim is somewhat of a biblical term. So we'll call them the dirty giants. So these dirty titanic ropes were so huge, so enormous, so thin. And due to all of the race mixing, bloodletting, all of that, they wound up dead. So they all had to get up out of here, right? Because it was just too much. It was just too much. So once they up out of here, they become the ground, they become the flooring for the rest of what humanity and what society, civilization would eventually be. However, they were not meant to exist. So because they didn't meant to exist, they didn't have souls. So therefore, when they died, the non-physical part of them could not go anywhere else. They're bound. You understand? So because they're bound, they become the whirling evil that just doesn't exist outside of here, because they gave up their earthly station. So when you look at Jupiter in the sky, when you look at all of these so-called planets, those were actually entities who separated themselves from their higher stations, right? And decided to come here and wreak havoc and live as whatever they could live as here. And so that caused too much problems. And so they had to get up out of here. So we got them up out of here with the flood technology, wiped these niggas out, right? Now the rest of the world is in darkness. So what are we going to do? What we got to do is go out to the rest of the world and start to re-establish society. So the Great Ice Age, the Younger Dryas period, these are all aftershocks of the great destruction and the great cataclysms and stuff that came with these ancient celestial wars that we in. And in the process of that, they were able to open up these portals that we had already been using, and they was using them as a means to help incarnate and bring some of these things over here to help them fight the rest of us that was trying to lock these things up. You understand? And so that became a bone of contention between all of us, and thus we went to war with one another. At the same time that we're basically reestablishing man, right, and distinguishing him from mankind throughout the world. So as this is happening, you know what I mean? We are naturally now the gods. We are the new gods of this epoch, because we are doing the work of the Father by getting rid of all of the undesirables that its manifestations, i.e. the cherubim, the ophanim, the seraphim, and these niggas basically created in spite of him, right? In spite of it. And thus they had to come down and teach these niggas how to do all of the whack shit that they doing to us now. And so this created a bone of contention, and thus different orders and priesthoods were derived to help preserve what Anu had left, right? So if you notice, it always comes down in threes. It's Anu, it's Enki, it's Enlil. It's Osiris, it's Set, it's Horus. It's Kronos, it's Zeus, it's Hades, right? It's Pontius Pilate, right? It's Christ, it's Barabbas. You see what I'm saying? It's always a three-trying situation. It's Nimrod, Semiramis, and then what you call it? Gilgamesh. It's always a three-pronged situation. You know what I'm saying? So this ultimately led to all of the situations and shit that we dealing with now. In terms of the destruction, in terms of the fighting, in terms of the clandestine situation that we have going on against the occult societies, meaning all the occult societies being against us. You know what I'm saying? So this is what we dealing with, unfortunately, y'all. Right? So let's move ahead further. Let's go back. So after that period, the Younger Dryas period, right? You can get this book right here, The Aboriginal Races of North America, blah, 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 right? The idea that it was Europeans who introduced civilization to Africa is one of the biggest historical myths and evidence in archaeology, oral history, tradition, languages, cultural practices strongly indicate that it was the South American Indians, i.e. Moors, right? Indians who introduced civilization to the so-called Africans over 7,000 years ago in what became what they call Greek, which is really Creek and Roman culture, right? Roman culture, we'll get into what that is, because they weren't a people. They had to derive out of the people and then started their process. They created a ritual society that was bent. We'll get into that. South America, Africa, the second continent in the world to become civilized. See? Spurred by the South American so-called Indian. Now, the problem with using terms like South American Indian, the Indians, the ancient Indians is, again, you're not being specific enough and you're not acknowledging them as that, because the modern concept of Indian that we have is either the feather people, right, the Siberian people, or the people, the Dravidian, the so-called Indus people. When really these ancient peoples that you call ancient Indians and this and that, these are ancient Canaanites. These are ancient Mauritanians. That's what they are. Ancient Canaanites, ancient Hittites, Amorites, Amalekites, all of the ones that was against the Hebrews. That's who these peoples are. The Hebrews were the people who decided that they were going to go against their original God that they had set up, and then decided they was going to follow another God, the storm god Yahweh, who they revered in the desert and when they was in the wilderness. Okay, but other than that, prior to that, he was a small stone god. The real God was Elion. Elion. El is the true and living, right? Then what happens when the Hebrews decide they're going to leave from Egypt, they need their own God now. So that's when they decide to take the storm god, Yahweh, because he was there protecting them when they was literally storming people's countries. They were storming in. The Hebrews was the first illegal immigrants. These was the first niggas that was coming from one area, going into another area, trying to find people who they could convert to their situation, and then put them people under the covenant, and then get them people to work with them to basically usurp whatever nation they was already there with. That's the story of Joshua. That's the story of every place that these types of people go, because Hebrew means he who crossed over the river, or he who crossed, or he who crosses. You understand? Think what I'm saying? He who crosses, because what the Hebrews were a 12-tribe district. Because Tuthmosis, so one of these niggas, put the group of the undesirables, because they weren't just one people. They were groups of different peoples who were of a certain class system. And in that, they wanted to have their own, but they wasn't trying to move forward on their own. So they had to find ways to adopt a new identity. When you read about Abraham, it says that he went amongst the Canaanites, who was highly advanced, highly civilized, adopted their language, adopted their customs, their way of life, then put his spin on it, then had 12 sons, said, this is what y'all gonna be now. So everything they are is a conglomeration of stuff that they have attained from other peoples that they lived amongst. Okay, that's just the reality. That's why Hebrews are not a race. They're not a people. They're a people who believe in something. But what they believe in most is crossing over, meaning leaving one area for the betterment of another. That's what God had told them to do. God promised them somebody else's land. God turned them into genocidal maniacs. God said, go into Canaan and destroy and burn and rape and kill everyone. Everyone. Now they say, well, that's because, they was the giants and the Nephilim and this and that. Yeah, however, they still had a culture, a whole society in which they wasn't doing nothing. And again, this is elements of our society that they came in and did this with. But the problem was we had beef with a lot of these niggas too. Just like in the Predators movie where you had the big predators who was fighting the smaller predators and shit. We was like the smaller predators fighting the bigger ones, but we was of the same blood. And then the Hebrews came and was like, yo, we can help you. We need land, and these niggas are destroying everything. We need help. If you could help us do that. And that's when the covenant was made between the Moabites and the Hebrews. And then that's when we started to allow them to sojourn in the land of Moab to get their shit together, right? And then we both consolidated together to work against and knock the rest of the evil ones out, the evil Raphaim. Now, the Raphaim were not the Nephilim. They weren't as big and powerful and everything. They were more like demiurgical. So they were more like, instead of whereas the Nephilim could be anywhere between, 90 stories, 200 and unfathomable heights. These niggas is really no higher than the size of like a redwood or something like that. So Africa was largely depopulated after the last polar shift over 6,000 years ago. 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, so-called Negroes from Central America, right? Central America, remember, that's here. That's mainland America, because this part of America we're in is in the center of it. Okay? That's the central part. In area around Nigeria. Meanwhile, the Dravidians had settled in southern Arabia, while the Asians began Madagascar and East Africa. The Bushmen, or the so-called Hottentots, and the remnants of these people. So in actuality, we're looking at ourselves as a group of peoples who, after the thing broke off, we were individually in individual places. But our people here were the ones who decided to go outward and help reestablish and bring humanity back into balance. Okay? So that's what we did. That's why everybody always comes here. And then we seeded them. We became their gods and then left, came back here. And then our remnant over there began to be worshipped and shit. Which is exactly what's going on today. Okay? So when all of that happened, or happens consistently, by the time we get to the time of Atlantis and all of that, it's pretty much arisen. Right? And so things start to change. People start to, again, that 40% dissatisfied starts to push the envelope, and now they want to have their own societies, and they want to have their own situation and all of that. And thus they start to call themselves and set up different nations for themselves to be. One of these nations, one of these, or a couple of these, right, were a group that today they call the Minoans. But they were just another branch of the Phoenicians, who were another branch of the Canaanites, who were another branch of the Tyrianites. You see what I'm saying? So the original melanated being is the original melanated being on every part of the earth. Period. Right? But of that, one of those societies that came up was the Keftui, right? Who they call Minoan. The term used in Egyptian inscriptions is widely identified with the Minoans. See? In the Bronze Age civilization of Crete, right? Well, what else happened in Crete, in the Crete area? What else is over there? The island of Patmos, right? What happened on Patmos or Pelon? That's when they started grafting the Tamahus, right? The Keftiu as exotic emissaries from distant and prosperous island kingdom, often depicting them in tomb paintings bearing bearers of valuable gifts. These representations found in tombs like Rekhmire and Sesenimut showcase the Keftiu envoys with distinct attire and lighter complexions bearing offerings of gold, silver, and finery. So again, you see, these is melanated people, but they happen to be lighter skinned because they're coming from the Peloponnesian regions, right? These Peloponnesian regions were, like I said, under the jurisdiction of the global force, the global admiralty force that was being run by the Phoenicians, right? But before we get into them, before you get into the Phoenicians, everybody talks about the Olmec, right? But there was another group even before them, right? Those people were called these were also so-called fez-wearing peoples. They were called their civilization was called Karala Supe or Kor El Super or Kor El Supe, right? Where is this at? This is also in the Americas. This is part of those societies that went out and started helping reestablish everything with everybody again. You ain't people in Corrales Supe wore fezzes and turbans, right? They find them etched in stone like this. The Corral civilization, all known as Corral Supe, was a part of the Norte Chico civilization complex in what is known as Norte Chico region of the north central coastal Peru, right, which is Jerusalem. The urban complex of Corral takes up more than 150 acres, contains plazas, dwellings, and 28-meter high temple. Okay. Now, people before them, before Corral Supe, who was before the Olmecs, right? These them people, they don't even necessarily have them. They got a name for them, but they don't even have a name for them. They just call them Paleo Indians. See what I'm saying? Always throwing the Indian thing in there. So what I'm saying is that whenever they use the term Indian, they really trying to just flip more. They just trying to take the more out and make you again regale your shit to some sort of nomenclature under somebody else, basically. Okay? So let's jump ahead to when everything started getting really crazy. So it really starts getting crazy, like I said, after the last great epoch, by the time that these things or these people we call the Romans start coming up. The Romans came out of the Etruscan people. The Etruscan people were, again, part of the old Phoenician Canaanite branch. So these are ancient Mauritanians as well. And they are very much a powerhouse in the region. But what happens is the Axumites wind up taking over parts of Ethiopia. They get rid of the original Turks or the Turkana that are there. And they destroy their capital. And then they move the capital from Liabella. See, all the L, everything with L, these niggas is attacking, right? From Liabella, and then they move it to Axum. And then that's when the Axumite Christianity, whatever, that shit starts. And thus Rome, right, they then start to send envoys up into the Etruscan areas, right, and then start to flip them, right? But what happens is there's a group called the Sabaeans at this point, and then the Sabaeans start to work against them. And the Sabaeans basically get captured by these new fledgling Romans and basically rape all of the women. And then once the women all get raped by these proto-Romans, that first stock becomes a part of that stock, right? And then that's when they basically start to try to absorb all of their neighbors, okay? And then that's when all of the problems really, really start. This is from a book called Traditions and Visits of the Foreigners to North America. And it was said, it was the belief of the wise Thomas Jefferson that America was the first seat of the human race, and that the Western Hemisphere was peopled from the West, were peopled by the people from the West, which is what more also means Western. The United States Court of France was published at the Americanum. From this letter exposing clearly stating that the first inhabitants of Asia, whom much resembled the American Aborigines, went from America to Asia, and instead of coming from Asia to America. Got it? Got it? That's why your man Thomas Jefferson could have a Quran, even though he allegedly was some sort of Christian. Even though, according to the Treaty of Tripoli, there is no enmity in which exists in which that the United States was founded on Christianity. That's false. The United States was never and will never and has never been a Christian-only nation. Okay? That's false. So these Romans, right? What these Romans did was that they came up off of a specific system. They had a system, right? So what made you a Roman was you going along with the system that the Romans, meaning the Romed man, those who had reversed themselves from being Moors and now had embraced the whole paganistic idea of power through conquest, power through paganism, power through blood sacrifice. That's what the Romans are. But these Romans, these are not Caucasian peoples, okay? These are melanated peoples, lighter skin to a certain degree, darker skin to another degree, but these are niggas who believe in paganism and war and offering blood sacrifice to gods. That's what made you a Roman, okay? That's what made you a Roman citizen in the game, all right? So I'm seeing back. It's all gonna come all full circle in a second, right? Look, on this side right here, this is a Roman armor. This is Roman crocodile armor. These niggas was grabbing up crocodiles, killing them, cutting them open, and wearing the armor. So that they also imagine a bunch of niggas in crocodile armor coming to you, trying to fight you. That's reptilian. These are the reptilians I'm talking to you about. The term Rome implies people who conquer by intrigue, force, and violence, and enslave the human mind through false doctrine of religious mystery and image or idol worship of various mystical God phrases, most common of which are Jehovah, God, Christ, Buddha, Muhammad. Let us remember that the United States of North America comprised every so-called race of the lily white family. The term Khan, right, implies the people who control the board, real estate, all of that. So the Pharaoh Khan, Genghis Khan, this was the land of the Khans, the Americans, right? And they went to war with the Romans. Remember, Washington, D.C. was named Rome. That's Rome. Okay? All of that Roman fighting and all that shit I showed you last week in the other video. When you see the people in Tibet with the Roman headpiece. When you see the people in Mexico with the ancient Roman headpiece, when you see the people in in actual Italy Rome with it, no matter what culture they in, when you see them with that, those are the Romans. They want you to think that they was just one type. No, they was a group of these melanated peoples who was living off of cult, off of piratism, murder, and paganism. Both of which the headquarters of the nobles, the dukes and lords and duchesses of Rome and Khan, the jury over the wealth and culture, who held jury over the wealth and culture of the Moorish or the Asiatic nations. our forefathers who were defeated by the Roman conquerors after having undergone 364 years of intermittent conflict, all the way from Patagonia, which is Chile, all the way to Alaska, to Canada and Greenland. That's the intermittent conflict period, right?